She lost her life because she mispronounced a word. Lydia Charity Schatz was born on March 15th of 2002 and was originally from Liberia. Kevin and Elizabeth Schatz lived in Paradise, California with their 6 biological children. The couple decided they wanted to add more to their family, so they headed to Liberia to adopt 3 children, including Lydia. What Lydia and her 2 siblings thought were going to be a loving home was the complete opposite. On February 5th of 2010, Lydia was harmed so badly with a 1/4-inch plastic tube just because she mispronounced a word. Kevin and Elizabeth held Lydia down for 9 hours and harmed her so badly on her back that it caused severe tissue damage. That following day, Lydia passed away in the hospital. Lydia's 11-year-old sister Zariah was also harmed by Kevin and Elizabeth because allegedly she was a bad influence and a liar. She was hospitalized in critical condition but fortunately survived. When Kevin and Elizabeth were being investigated, they stated that they used a child discipline teachings by a fundamentalist Christian organization. Investigators discovered that Elizabeth and Kevin were doing this to their biological children as well, and were even teaching their oldest daughter to join in on doing this to her siblings. In court, Kevin was found guilty and sentenced to a minimum of 22 years, and Elizabeth was also found guilty and sentenced to 13 years in prison.
They stuffed her in a barrel of cement after torturing her for 44 days. She was only 17. Her name was Junko, a gorgeous high schooler living in Japan, and one night she was riding her bike home, not knowing that 2 boys were following her. One of the boys suddenly runs up and deliberately knocks Junko off of her bike and then just takes off. He falls to the ground hard and is all bruised up, but then this other boy who just happened to be there runs over and helps her up, even offering her to walk her home because it's so dark out. Junko is absolutely terrified, but she did recognize him. It's Hiroshi. They were classmates, so she trusted him and agreed. But as they're walking, they pass this really sketchy abandoned warehouse, and Hiroshi's entire vibe changed. His face goes cold and his voice drops. If you scream or try to run, I will get the Yakuza to kill your entire family. Basically the Japanese mafia. Super dangerous. It turns out that this whole entire thing was a calculated setup from the beginning. That boy who knocked her off her bike, that was literally Hiroshi's friend Shingi. Every single second was planned. Make her fall, pretend to be the hero, gain her trust, then drag Junko into the building and SA her. All because Hiroshi was rejected by her a couple days earlier. Like, imagine being so fragile that you decide to torture somebody for rejecting you. I literally cannot. He then calls his friends, bragging about what he did, and they were like, keep her hostage. We want turns too. Like, what? And that night, Hiroshi took Junko to a park where 3 more boys took turns gang SAing her for hours. Then they took her to Shingi's house, where he had the audacity of introducing her to his parents as his girlfriend. Meanwhile, Junko's parents are freaking out because she'd never disappeared like this before. So they reported her missing and a search began immediately. But when Hiroshi heard about this, he forced Junko to call her parents. He made her say that she hated them and ran away on purpose. This actually enraged me so much. Because of that call, the search was completely cut off. And for the next 44 days, this poor girl endured literal hell. She was SA'd over 400 times, forced to eat cockroaches, human waste, and drink urine, and that's not even half of it. These sick, twisted monsters actually treated her like a human punching bag. Like, they literally and then started punching her for fun. They humiliated her in ways that I can't even describe on here. They poured lighter fluid on her and set her on fire multiple times. They would jump on her stomach, drop weights on her, insert glass bottles, scissors, fireworks, and other objects into her private area. Her internal organs were so damaged, but they still invited over 100 Yakuza members to SA her. And one day, she actually managed to get a phone and call the police, and she thought that she'd finally be able to escape, but Hiroshi caught her and grabbed the phone. As punishment, they set her legs on fire until she passed out from the pain. And the craziest part, Shingi's parents knew everything. They heard her screaming in the basement, but they were too scared of their son's Yakuza connections to help. The torture was just so bad that Junko would beg them to end her suffering. One of the boys named Ihara tried to SA her, but he was so disgusted by the burns and pus oozing out of her bruises that he couldn't even get it up. But the 4 boys pressured him to SA her anyways, and that just makes me so sick to my stomach. Later, Ihara felt so guilty that when he got home, he told his brother everything that happened. His brother then told his parents, who then called the police immediately. 2 police officers went to go investigate Shingi's home, but when they got there, Shingi's parents lied to their faces. They told the police that they knew nothing about a girl being held hostage. Shingi said the same thing and even had the nerve to invite the officers to come inside and check. The 2 officers thought, well, if they were hiding something, why would they invite us in? So the officers declined, walked away, and even wrote on their reports that they searched the home. She could have been saved. That's so infuriating. By day 44, Junko had managed to actually beat them in a game of Mohong. It was one tiny moment of victory, but it sent them into such a rage that they would beat her for 2 hours straight until she died. Then they put her body in a plastic barrel filled with concrete and then dumped it, leaving her to rot. And the absolute worst part, when they were finally caught, Hiroshi, the ringleader, was sentenced to just 20 years, and the others no more than 8. And today, every single one of them is free. There was just no justice for her.
This is one of the most disturbing images that you will ever see for multiple reasons. Let's talk about it. This is an x-ray of the pelvis of serial killer and cannibal Albert Fish. Albert had a serious self-harm and sexual mutilation kink, and in this x-ray, 29 self-embedded needles were lodged into his pelvic region. This in itself is incredibly disturbing, but who Albert Fish was and what he did is horrifying. Albert Fish, also known as the Boogeyman in the Brooklyn Vampire, S.A.'d, killed, and cannibalized at least 3 children between 1924 and 1928, but he was a suspect in at least 10 other murders and bragged about possibly having 100 victims. After Albert's dad died when he was really young, his mom placed him into an orphanage where he was often physically abused, but after a while he began to enjoy the physical pain from the beatings. By the age of 12, he began drinking urine and eating feces and would often spy on other young boys and watch them undress. By 20, he began S.A.ing little boys, mostly under the age of 6, and it was around this time that he married a woman named Anna. They went on to have 6 kids together. Although his life seemed normal on the outside, his secret disturbing behavior would begin to escalate when in 1910 he met a teenager named Thomas. The two began a sadomasochistic relationship, and just 10 days into the relationship, Albert took him to an old farmhouse where he tortured him over a period of 2 weeks. He originally wanted to kill Thomas and dismember his body to take home, but it was really hot out at the time, and he said he feared someone would notice. So instead, he cut off half of Thomas's poured peroxide over the wound, wrapped it in a towel covered in Vaseline, and then gave him $10. Albert then left him there and never looked back. A few years later, his wife would leave him, and it was at this point that Albert began having hallucinations and began to self-harm. This is where he picked up the habit of self-embedding the needles into his pelvic region. He would also repeatedly hit himself with a nail-studded paddle, amongst other really disturbing things that I cannot say on here. At this point, Albert would escalate to torturing, mutilating, and murdering young children because he said that God was commanding him to do so. He would use tools that he called his implements of hell, which included a meat cleaver, a butcher knife, and a handsaw. He went on to murder 10-year-old Grace Budd in the summer of 1928 after the Budd family put out an ad in the newspaper. Grace's brother Edward was looking for work, and Albert responded to the ad under the pretense of wanting to hire Edward. But instead he saw Grace, and he convinced her parents to let him take her to his niece's birthday party, which unfortunately was a complete lie. Instead, Albert took Grace to an abandoned house in Irvington, New York, where he strangled her to death. He then decapitated her and dismembered her body and ate most of her remains over the next few days. One of the most disturbing things about Albert was that he was known to write disturbing letters to the victims' families, and that's exactly what he did to the Budd family. Albert sent them an extremely gruesome and disturbing letter detailing what he did to Grace, how it took 9 days to eat her entire body. And in this letter, he also detailed other horrific child murders. One was the murder of 9-year-old Francis McDonnell, who disappeared after playing catch with some friends. He was later found hanging from a tree in a wooded area near his home. He had been S.A.'d and strangled with his suspenders. He also had extreme lacerations to his legs and stomach, and his left hamstring had almost entirely been stripped of its flesh. The next confession was the murder of 4-year-old William Gaffney. On February 11th, 1927, William was playing in his apartment hallway with a 3-year-old named Billy and Billy's 12-year-old brother. After a while, the 12-year-old stepped away, and it was at that moment that both the little boys disappeared. Billy was later found on the apartment roof, and when police asked him what happened to William, Billy said that the boogeyman took him. A witness later identified Albert as the person who kidnapped William that day, and although William's body was never found, Albert explained in great detail what he did to him in a letter that he wrote. Albert wrote how he cooked and ate his body parts in a stew. Albert was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Grace Budd, in which he was convicted. He was executed by electric chair on January 16, 1936, at the age of 65 years old. Right before his execution, Albert wrote down his final confessions and gave them to his lawyer, but his lawyer said that he would never show them to anyone because of how disturbing they were. Albert Fish is one of the scariest men to ever exist.
He went from Mr. Gay UK to a cannibalistic killer, committing one of the most gruesome murders that police had ever seen. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Damien Oldfield. In 1993, when he was just 21 years old, Anthony Morley would win the first ever Mr. Gay UK beauty contest. Along with winning a cash prize of £1,000 and a holiday to Gran Canaria, winning this title would open up a world of opportunity for Anthony. Growing up, he had dreamed of becoming a dancer, and so after winning this title, he made the move, moving from Leeds down to London to follow the bright lights, hoping to break out in the industry, and he did. He found work as a dancer and a model, and he was somewhat successful. Eventually he would move back up north. He would move in the Bexley Place area of Leeds. He began working as a sous chef inside of a very high-end restaurant where he specialised in seafood. Anthony Morley really struggled with two major things in his life. The first thing being his sexuality. He didn't know if he was straight or if he was gay or if he was bisexual. He had very serious, committed, long-term relationships with both men and women, so not really being able to pinpoint his sexuality was something that really bothered Anthony. He would later describe that in his childhood years, he had been a victim of SA by a much older man, and this really had an effect on his sexual identity. The other thing was that he struggled with alcohol. As soon as some alcohol crossed Anthony Morley's lips, he would turn into a monster. He would be violent and aggressive. On one occasion, he was arguing with his boyfriend at the time, and they were arguing over some money when Anthony tried to attack him with a meat cleaver. On another occasion, he was drunk in a bar and he got into an altercation with another man. He grabbed this man by the throat and threatened to kill him. On the 23rd of April 2008, Anthony had spent the day texting back and forward with a man named Damien Oldfield. Damien was an out and proud man who worked for the magazine Bent. He was one of these people where he lived life to the fullest and he did not take 1 minute for granted. He loved life and he loved the people that he surrounded himself with. He had an amazing support network consisting of his friends and his family. Anthony and Damien did already know each other. They had previously been in a romantic relationship, but at this moment in time they weren't in a relationship. They were just agreeing to meet up. They met in Leeds city centre before heading back to Anthony's home where they were going to be having a bit of a date night. Anthony, being the sous chef specialising in seafood, cooked the pair of them a fish dish, and they spent the night drinking alcohol together, kissing, cuddling and snuggling. Nothing would have prepared Damien for what was about to come. The two men eventually made their way up to Anthony's bedroom where they put on the DVD Brokeback Mountain before Anthony eventually drifted off to sleep. In court, Anthony would say that he was awoken by Damien, who was performing a sexual act on him without his consent, and this made Anthony feel used, betrayed, and above all, triggered. The traumatizing memories of being SA'd in his childhood came flooding back to him, and then all of a sudden, everything went black. Damien Oldfield would have his throat slit from behind before being stabbed at least 30 times by Anthony Morley. Some of these stab wounds were delivered post-mortem, meaning that Damien was already dead when Anthony was still stabbing him. Anthony would then slice off parts of Damien's flesh, taking them to his kitchen where he proceeded to cook them in oil, butter and herbs. At approximately 2:30 a.m, Anthony would run into a nearby kebab shop dressed in only a blood-soaked dressing gown and flip-flops. He asked one of the staff members inside to ring the police because he had just murdered a man who had tried to R-word him. He then stood outside of the shop and waited for the police to arrive to arrest him. When the police arrived at Anthony's home, they would discover the body of Damien, and strangely, Anthony had put a bank card on Damien's neck wound, trying to conceal it or maybe trying to leave a message. They discovered a 9-inch piece of Damien's flesh which had been cut from his chest. This bit of flesh included a nipple, and that had just been cut from his body. They found a pan on the hob which still had bits of Damien's flesh and muscle inside of it, alongside the oil, the butter, the herbs and the seeds. Some of this was also found chewed up in the bin, so it had clearly been chewed, and some of it potentially consumed by Anthony. During the trial, Anthony Morley was quoted saying, "At some point, Damien's body had just become something I would deal with at work, a piece of meat. That's the only thing I can think of. That was my daily task. preparing meat. Anthony Morley would be found guilty of the murder of Damien Oldfield, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 30 years to serve.
Imagine the missing piece of evidence that could solve a cold case was sat there in front of you the whole time. A horrifying 911 call came into police one night in Durham in North Carolina. It was a man wailing that he'd come home and found his wife murdered. If you want to hear the full 911 call, I play it on the Janet Abaroa episode on the Born Investigation podcast. But basically, the crime scene made absolutely no sense. It felt like it might have been a burglary gone wrong because a few things were taken from the scene, but then why had other things like wedding rings been left in plain sight? And it turned out she'd been stabbed to death, which suggested a personal motive. This case remained cold for years until police finally took another look at evidence that had been there the whole time. So originally, Raven, the husband, said that what had happened prior to the killing was that Janet, his wife, who was now killed, had gone to bed and he had gone out to play football. Police were a little bit confused when they re-looked at the evidence and found that Janet's contact lens case was empty on the side. I don't know if any of you guys wear contact lenses, but I've heard it's extremely bad to go to sleep in them because it can be so uncomfortable the next day. And Janet's lenses were nowhere to be found, meaning she likely hadn't taken them off that night at all, which meant Raven's story didn't make sense had she really gone to bed that night. So to prove that Raven was lying about this timeline, investigators needed to prove that Janet was wearing her contact lenses when she was killed. But by this point, she'd been buried for years, which meant only one thing: they needed to dig her back up. It's absolutely fascinating to me how you can literally solve a murder by piecing pieces of the puzzle together. And guess what they found when Janet was exhumed? The lenses were in fact still in her eyes. She'd never gone to bed that night. Raven had lied. This investigation is absolutely fascinating. If you want all of the details, the latest episode of The Born Investigation, The Murder of Janet Abaroa, is now out on my podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
This man locked his daughter in the basement for 24 years and forced her to have 7 of his children. It's one of the most notorious kidnappings in history and a crime that truly shocked the world. This man makes me feel ill. Josef Fritzl and his wife Rosemarie had 7 children, but Josef always had a very bizarre obsession with his one daughter Elizabeth and began essaying her when she was only 11 years old. Josef says that he chose Elizabeth because she was the daughter that most resembled his own mother. Like, yuck. His wife, Rosemarie, claims that she had no idea that this abuse was going on, but it is important to note that after they were married for about 10 years, Josef spent a year in prison for breaking into a woman's home and essaying her at knife point. So this woman definitely knew the man that she was married to. Elizabeth tried multiple times to escape her father's abuse by running away, but since she was a minor, she would always be brought back home by the police, no questions asked. So when Elizabeth turned 18, she was a legal adult now. She planned to move out. She had a job all lined up. She had all the plans set, but her father, Josef, could not allow this. It was shortly after Elizabeth turned 18, her father, Josef, asked her help bringing down a heavy door into their basement. For the past 6 years, Josef told his family that he was redoing the basement so he had a place to work, but what he was really doing was building a secret prison underneath the family home. And the door that he asked Elizabeth to help him bring down would be the door that she would be locked behind for 24 years. Elizabeth was locked down in the basement, no sunlight, no fresh air, nothing to do, no one to talk to. The only person she would see would be her father, Josef, her captor, when he would come downstairs to bring her small amounts of food and water and to essay her. Elizabeth's mother, Rosemarie, and the rest of the family are concerned about where Elizabeth went, so they went and reported her missing. So Josef forced Elizabeth to write a letter to the family saying that, she ran away, don't look for her. So her case was closed, but she was in the basement. She was in the basement and no one was looking for her. After 5 years of captivity, at the age of 23, Elizabeth gave birth to her first baby all alone, and this would be the first of 7 children she was forced to have with her own father. One of these babies was sadly born very, very sick. Elizabeth begged Josef to take the baby to the hospital, but he didn't because he thought it would blow his cover. So the baby sadly passed away after only being 3 days old, and then Josef put its body in the furnace. Josef did not think there was enough room in the basement for all these babies that Elizabeth was being forced to have, so Josef allowed Elizabeth to keep her 3 older children,
but when she gave birth to the 3 younger children, Joseph stole them from her, you guys, and then he would wrap them up, put them in a basket, and then put them on the front porch step for his wife Rosemary to find. Then Joseph and Rosemary would raise these babies, and Joseph would attach each baby with a little note from Elizabeth, their long-lost daughter, saying that she had this baby, but she was leaving it on the doorstep because she couldn't raise it. So Rosemary was raising 3 of her grandchildren, but they were really the children of her daughter and her husband. And because Joseph is such a sick individual, he would take photos of the 3 children that were allowed to live above ground, you know, doing normal things like swimming in swimming pools, playing in the snow, having birthday parties, and then he would take those photos and show them to the children that were being forced to live underground that had never even seen sunlight in their entire lives, to show them what they were like missing out on. And if you're wondering how Rosemary or any of the rest of the family ever found that all these children and missing Elizabeth were living in the basement, well, for one, they were banned from going down there, but he also rigged it so in case anyone ever actually did go down there, they wouldn't find it. So you see there's the stair. These are the stairs from like upstairs, downstairs, and this is a utility room, and this is where he would say he would work. And then this red door was hidden behind like a bookcase, so no one would see that there was this huge prison where all these people were being held captive. So in 2008, after Elizabeth has been locked up underground for 24 years, she's in her 40s now. Remember, she got locked underground when she was 18. Her oldest child, 19-year-old Kirsten, got seriously sick. Kirsten seriously needed medical attention or she probably wasn't going to survive. So again, Elizabeth begged Joseph to take Kirsten to the hospital. But of course, at first he said absolutely not. But then he changed his mind because he probably realized that if she did die, what would he do with the body? Like, he couldn't just lift out a grown woman's body up the stairs of the basement and no one would see it. And then once he did do that, if he could do that, what would he do with it afterwards? So Joseph did bring her to the hospital. At the hospital, Kirsten was in terrible condition, and the hospital was like really suspicious because there was no record of this person existing before she came into the hospital. She had white hair. Her skin was so pale, it was almost translucent. She was 19 years old, but honestly, guys, they were thinking this person was 40 years old because remember, she's never seen sunlight in her entire life. So the hospital actually contacts the police, and the police go there. They're trying to talk to Joseph, but he's not giving anything up. He thinks he's really, really smart, and he thought he had total control and was so smart, in fact, that he went and got Elizabeth, his daughter, that he's had locked up for over 2 decades, and had her come out of the basement for the first time in 24 years to go talk to the police and clear everything up. So the police are now talking to Elizabeth, who also has white hair. She's in her 40s, but she looks 60. Like, everyone looked 20 years older than they were supposed to. Her skin is also pale as, you know, paper, and they're grilling Elizabeth, and she's not giving any answers either, but they're not taking no for an answer. They keep pushing her, and they're pushing Elizabeth until she broke down and finally confessed everything. The police, they go to the house, they find the cellar, they find the other children, and the interesting thing about this is the investigators that were in that cellar for, you know, not that long a time, they were just walking around it, finding these children. They were so traumatized by the sight of this like prison that these people were being held captive in that many of them needed therapy after. So just think about these grown men just in this cellar, this basement, this prison for a small amount of time needing therapy. Imagine how messed up everyone else was that was locked in there their entire lives pretty much. Elizabeth was 18 years old when she went down. She was in there for 24 years. She spent more time in that basement than she did out of the basement. Like, I'm 26 years old, being locked in the basement for 24 years, like, that's an entire lifetime for most of the people that are probably watching this video right now. So Joseph is obviously arrested, and at first he tried to deny everything. He said that his relationship with his daughter was consensual, and that the children liked living in the cellar, but this obviously did not work, and eventually he did plead guilty on all charges and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. He has spent most of his sentence so far in a hospital for the criminally insane, but he was transferred to real prison very recently in May of 2024, where he is now eligible for parole, but I doubt he will get it. But let me know what you think. Elizabeth and her 6 children are living under new identities in a small village somewhere in Austria, and I really, really do hope the best for them. They're living completely out of the public eye. They don't do interviews. I think we should respect whatever wishes they had. I know a lot of people try to show up to that village trying to interview them. That's gross. Leave them alone. All do need ongoing therapy, which is completely understandable. Also, Elizabeth, for a long time, held a lot of resentment against her mother, Rosemarie, which is also completely understandable. I'm really, really interested to hear from Rosemarie, though, if she ever does choose to do an interview, which I don't think she would, because I want to know what she thought when all this came to light and realizing that her missing daughter has been underground the entire time by the hands of her own husband. We do know that Elizabeth eventually did forgive her mother, and they apparently have a really, really strong, loving relationship, and I truly do hope the best for all of them. Please let me know all your thoughts on this case in the comments. You guys have been begging me to cover this case for the longest time. While you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next, and until then, I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
This horror film is even more terrifying when you realise it's based on an actual horrifying mass murder. This one's going to have you double, triple, quadruple checking that you've locked your doors. It was the late 70s in Springfield, Massachusetts. Glenna Sharp, known as Sue, was about to make a big move. She had a pretty big family. She had her husband James and her 5 children. Now these ranged from the ages of 15 to 5. She very much had her hands full. These were Johnny, Sheila, Tina, Ricky and Greg. And she was a really good mum, and she would do anything to protect her children, including leaving her husband. She found out he was SAing their own daughters, and she was like, I am gone. She wanted to start a new life for her and her kids in a beautiful new place, and after trialing a few different areas, she decided they'd settle in Keddie in California. And they lived in this cute little wooden cabin. Now, it wasn't much, but it was home. It was certainly a squeeze though. But everything changed on the night of the 11th of April 1981. Now, Sue's 14-year-old daughter Sheila had gone round to the neighbour's house for a sleepover. She had no idea she'd return home to an absolute bloodbath. At around 10 a.m, Sheila was like, right, I'll get going now, I'll go home, I need to change my clothes before I go to church. And she was thinking, my mum is going to be wondering where I am soon. Her mum was not wondering where she was. Her mum was lying dead in a pool of her own blood. Now, when Sheila walked in, she stopped dead in her tracks. It was eerily silent, and in front of her were the dead bodies of her mum, her brother John, and her brother John's friend Dana, who'd been staying over that night. They were bound and gagged, strangled, beaten, and stabbed. A scene that Sheila had only before witnessed in horror films. Suddenly she heard screaming, and then in her confused state she realised it was her that was screaming. In an absolute panic, she ran shaking to the neighbour's house. She got help, and they were like, what the hell is she talking about? Suddenly it started dawning on them, if there's 3 dead bodies here, where is everybody else from the house? Is there more dead bodies? Is anyone hiding? Is the attackers still inside? So shaking, Sheila and her friend Jamie ran back around to the cabin and had a little look. They were peering through the windows, trying to see if there was any sign of life inside. And they never expected what they saw in one of the bedrooms. Lying peacefully asleep were the 3 younger children. Now this was Rick, Greg and a friend Justin who was staying over. By this point, police were already racing round over to the scene, and neighbours encouraged the young children to actually climb out of the window rather than go past all of the dead bodies. So you've got the 3 victims here, you've also got the 3 that have survived. So where was Tina? The 12-year-old was nowhere to be seen, and only one of the neighbours actually recalled hearing anything that night. It was kind of like muffled screaming, but they didn't know whether it was just a joke or not. How does this huge bloody murder scene unfold and pretty much nobody hears a single thing? How did those 3 children sleep through it? At first it was thought that Tina was kidnapped and potentially she could be alive somewhere and tell us something. But heartbreakingly, 3 years after the massacre, her skull was found discarded in Butte County. In my mind, the first obvious suspect is the ex-husband James. He clearly had a motive for revenge, and the police agreed. But he had a confirmed alibi, so officers needed to look elsewhere. So Justin, the little boy that had been staying over the night, said to detectives he'd had a really bad nightmare that night. He wasn't really sure whether it was real or whether it was just in his sleep. They got him to describe what he saw that night, and they came up with a sketch of 2 people that he had reportedly dreamt about. One looked eerily like his own stepdad, Martin Smart. And Martin was known to not be a nice guy at all. He was abusive. And apparently Sue was friends with his wife. And Sue had been kind of coaching her and saying like, look, I've left my abusive husband. I'm happy now. You can do the same. So was this an act of revenge from Martin? He was known to have this beef with Sue. Some people think he was to blame, and he certainly acted a bit dodgy after the murders. He actually fled to Nevada, and several people said that he admitted to them that he killed this family. And word on the street was also that Martin was friends with someone in the police department, so some people think this was a huge cover-up. Call me paranoid, but I think maybe this is something to do with why this case is chillingly unsolved to this day. And maybe it's just me, but the horror film The Strangers now feels so much more chilling and eerie to me, knowing that it's based around cases like this.
This 14-year-old boy was given the electric chair after being wrongly convicted. On March 23rd of 1944, two young white girls, 11-year-old June Binnicker and 7-year-old Mary Emma Thames, went missing in South Carolina. Their bodies ended up being discovered in a ditch after being brutally unalived. The girls were last seen riding their bicycles looking for flowers, and that's when they passed by the Stinney family property and they stopped to ask 14-year-old George Stinney Jr. and his sister if they knew where to find passion flowers. That would be the last time that those girls were seen. Since there was no evidence, no witnesses, and no real investigation, police questioned both George and his 17-year-old brother Johnny. Johnny was eventually released because investigators claimed that he wasn't involved. George was interrogated alone, meaning no lawyer, no parents, and no one there to protect him. They figured that since George was younger and smaller, it was going to be easier to put the pressure on him. Hours later, officers claimed that George had confessed, but there was no written or signed statement. It was just the word of law enforcement. Once trial began for George, it only lasted 2 hours. The all-white jury took just 10 minutes to find him guilty. George's court-appointed lawyer made no effort to challenge the case against him. Not a single witness was called in his defense, and there was no kind of evidence linking him to the crime. As for George's sentence, it would be death by electric chair. On June 16th of 1944, George was executed in the electric chair. He was only 5'1" and weighed 95 pounds. George was so small that they had to place a Bible on the seat to strap him in. They placed a mask on George's face, but since the mask was too big, the initial electric shock knocked off the mask and you could see the panic on this young boy's face. It took only 3 jolts of electricity to end his life. George's parents couldn't even attend his trial because they were forced out of town by threats. For 70 years, George's name was marked by the crime he never committed. It wasn't until 2014 that a judge overturned his conviction, calling it a great and fundamental injustice. A South Carolina court ruled that he had not received a fair trial and was wrongfully executed. But justice for George came far too late.
She ate a poisoned cake that had been left on her doorstep, and the person who sent it to her was the last that anyone would have expected. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Ana Neves. Ana was a 17-year-old girl from Brazil. She was a junior in her high school, where her classmates would describe her as a beautiful star. She was quite a quiet and shy, reserved girl. She kept herself to herself, didn't get into any bother, and she was part of a very small, close-knit group of friends. On the 30th of May 2025, so very recently, a delivery driver would arrive at Anna's home with either a cake or some cupcakes, delivering them to Ana. Alongside the cake, there was some love notes, one of which read, quote, "A treat for the most beautiful girl I've ever seen." Ana was ecstatic and flattered with this delivery. She thought that this came from a secret admirer, but really, she had no idea who this came from. Excitedly, she snapped a couple of photos and sent them to her friends before digging into the cake. Only an hour later, however, Ana would come over incredibly ill. She was having intense stomach pains, sickness and diarrhea, and it was actually so bad that her dad rushed her to the hospital. The doctor would say that Ana had food poisoning, so she went on the drip for a couple of hours before being sent home, despite still not feeling very well. Overnight, Anna's condition didn't improve, it worsened. It got so bad that she would actually collapse on her bathroom floor and went into cardiac arrest. Her father piled her into the car and rushed to the hospital. However, sadly, she had already died before her arrival. Resuscitation attempts on Anna were futile and she was pronounced dead. The family had so many questions though. They couldn't understand how Anna had died from something as simple as food poisoning, how she had even got food poisoning in the first place because they had all ate the same and they were fine. Yet Anna had this really intense reaction. It was then that Anna's younger sister remembered about the cake that had showed up on their doorstep that Anna had eaten. She told her parents about this, who then alerted the police. Officers were able to track down the person who delivered the cake to Anna's home. This person was ordered over an app, so it wasn't from a shop or anything like that. When they tracked down this person, which they were able to do so after getting the registration from his vehicle through CCTV, he was able to give police the address where he picked the cake up from, and who this led police to send shockwaves through Anna's family. Because this person is a minor, their name hasn't been released, and so for the sake of this video, I am going to refer to them as Marsha. Anna and Marsha were best friends. They were joined at the hip and spent all of their time together, even having sleepovers at one another's house. In fact, when Anna took poorly from that poisoned cake, Marsha was sleeping over at her home. She witnessed Anna collapsing and going into cardiac arrest in the bathroom, and Anna's father would later describe Marsha as having no reaction and being void of emotion watching her best friend in this state. When police arrived at Marsha's home after getting her address off that delivery driver, she was escorted to the station for an interview. Eventually, she would make a full confession, confessing to lacing a cake that she had bought from a shop with poison, specifically arsenic, that she ordered offline, and then getting this cake delivered to Anna. She claimed that she didn't mean to kill her, she only wanted to scare her. Unbelievably, Marsha also confessed that Anna wasn't the only person that she did this to. She sent a poisoned cake to another young girl, however this young girl made a full recovery from the poisoning. It's believed that Marsha did this out of sheer jealousy of Anna. She believed that Anna was more beautiful and more popular than she was. This case is still ongoing, so I will continue to give you all updates, so make sure to follow so that you don't miss out on any of them.
You already know that the things that this man did were so evil, sick, and twisted when they could not even release all the details of his crime to the public because they were that horrific and disturbing. Jamie Asuna's dad was an abusive a-hole. He literally kicked Jamie's pregnant mom in the stomach when she was pregnant with Jamie, leaving Jamie with permanent damage when he was born. And then Jamie's mom left that abusive relationship and got into another one when she married Jamie's stepfather, Jeff, who was honestly probably 10 times worse. When Jamie was still an infant, the whole family was driving. Jamie was in the backseat in his car seat and he was crying because that's what babies do. And Jeff got so upset that Jamie was crying that he reached back into the backseat, opened the car door, pushed Jamie and his car seat out of the car door while the car was moving. And this gave Jamie permanent brain damage, and they did not even bring him to the hospital. Jamie's mom and stepdad ended up having their own children, and allegedly Jeff was like a really good dad to his biological children, but he still hated Jamie and did everything to make Jamie feel outcasted. When the family would all sit down for family dinner, all of them would eat together but Jamie. Jamie was forced to just sit there and watch everybody eat, and it was only after everyone was finished their dinner that Jeff would put Jamie's food on the floor and make him eat like a dog. Jamie is obviously a very messed up child because of this. When he was 12, he admitted that he used to put the family's cats in the freezer or the oven. And when Jamie was 15, he spent 4 years in juvie for stabbing a neighborhood kid. And after Jamie was released from juvie, he was 19, and a little bit later, he met his future wife at a house party. Jamie's wife does not want her name in the public, so the media just refers to her as Jane. Jane is a really loved, sweet, single mom. She's at this house party and she's dancing with another guy. Well, Jamie goes right up to the guy that Jane is dancing with and stabs him. And that's how Jamie met his future wife. Talk about red flags. Well, Jamie went to prison for this, obviously, but he only spent less than 1 year behind bars, and it was behind bars that him and Jane started a relationship. They would write letters back and forth. It was also during this prison sentence that Jamie began to get his face tattoos, including a Joker's smile. He really thinks of himself as a Joker. When Jamie was released from prison, Jane was actually the one to come pick him up, and they immediately went to a hotel to have a little bit of fun. It was supposed to be a one-time hookup, but that one-time hookup resulted in a pregnancy. Jamie says that he was really excited to be a dad. He wanted to step up and be a good man and have a family with Jane, so they got married. But sadly, the cycle of abuse is a real thing, and Jamie, who was once a victim of abuse, became the abuser. Jamie would physically abuse Jane, but it was also mental abuse, like psychological abuse. The most notable instance of this was one time Jamie and Jane were having a fight, and Jamie stole Jane's mother's ashes. And to this day, she has never gotten them back. You have to be one sick, twisted individual to mess with someone's loved one's ashes. Jamie would spend some time in and out of prison for this, but he was never locked up for long. It was only ever a couple months. And he would always come back to Jane apologizing, saying he was a changed man, and then Jane would take him back, but the abuse would continue. It actually wasn't until Jamie put his hands on one of Jane's kids that she had enough. She dumped his ass, sent him back to jail again, but he was released again, and then once he was out of prison, he began to harass, stalk, and threaten Jane. He would call Jane all hours of the day, threatening her life, and would even show up at her house. So one day, it was actually only 8 days after Jamie had just gotten out of prison again for laying his hands on one of Jane's kids, that he called Jane again. She thought that it was going to be the same old song and dance, and she picks up, but this time Jamie just says, "I just killed someone at the Morocco Hotel," and hung up. Jane obviously calls 911 to report this, because who wouldn't, but they did nothing. They never went to the Morocco Motel to see if this was true. It actually took 5 whole days after this phone call for a Morocco Motel employee to go into the room and find Jamie's victim's body. In the motel room was the body of 37-year-old beloved mother of 6, Yvette Pena. She is a stranger to Jamie. To this day, a motive is unclear, but what he did to her was brutal. Actually, most of the details about what Jamie did to Yvette has never been released to the public because they are that disturbing and horrific. 5 days later, Jamie was found and arrested, but he denied any involvement. Behind bars awaiting trial, Jamie continued to torment his now ex-wife Jane by calling her all the time. He was calling CPS to try and get her kids taken away from her. He would send her letters that he had written in blood, and even sent her a smashed up dead rat through the mail. It was this time in prison awaiting trial that he got the rest of his face tattoos. Jamie spent 5 whole years behind bars waiting for his trial to start, 5 whole years of claiming that he was innocent. It actually wasn't until 3 days before his trial was supposed to start that Jamie did an on-camera interview with a reporter, and he blatantly just says that he did it and he would do it again. It was also during this interview that Jamie claims that he had more victims out there, at least 2 more victims, and that he started killing when he was 13 years old, but it has never been confirmed, and personally, I think he's lying. Following Jamie's confession, he was offered a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. That's what he did, and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Yvette's family would attend every single hearing, every single court appearance that Jamie had, and Jamie would torment her family by smiling at them and waving at them. Also, this one clip of Jamie while one of Yvette's loved ones are speaking, and I think I just have to play it for you now so you can see how messed up it is.
I've sat in this courtroom more than a dozen times, and all I've seen was a smile. But I do hope that one day that Osuna will have sorrow and remorse.
But this case does not end here, unfortunately. In prison, it was determined that Jamie was way too dangerous to have a cellmate until 2019. This is extremely controversial why this happened, how this happened, but 44-year-old Luis Romero, who was actually about to end his prison sentence and be released, was transferred to Jamie's prison and put in Jamie's cell, and less than 24 hours later, he would be found dead. This is incredibly disturbing, you guys, but somehow Jamie was able to create a makeshift sharp weapon which he used to cut out Luis's eyes, his fingers. He removed those. He removed part of his ribs, and then he also removed his head, and then also carved the Joker smile onto him. When the guards finally did find his body, Jamie was wearing a necklace that he had made of his body parts, you guys, and then in blood he wrote in the wall, "Ha ha 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 ha," all over the place, like he literally thinks he's the Joker. And then he also wrote on the wall, "I am the man with 1,000 faces." Jamie has still not gone to trial for this crime. They were going back and forth whether or not he was competent enough to stay on trial, but I do believe it was determined that he is competent. It's really, really fuzzy, the details. I did see that they are shooting for a trial at the beginning of 2025, and they are trying to get him the death penalty this time. This case was really, really scary, so if you guys are still here, thank you, because I don't know how you guys made it through it. I barely did. I love you guys so, so much. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments, and while you're there, please let me know what case you'd want to see me cover next. I love you guys so, so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
She looked like a normal 8-year-old girl, but she was actually 17, starved by her parents to keep her their little girl forever. Her real name is hidden for privacy, so we'll just call her Katie. Katie loved ballet. She was this talented little ballerina. She was homeschooled by her parents in Australia, immediate red flag, and everyone in this town literally thought that she was just this shy little girl who was obsessed with ballet. But Katie was 17 years old. She only weighed 60 pounds. I'm not even joking. The same size as an 8-year-old, because her parents had her on this near-death starvation diet to keep her tiny to prevent her from developing at all. They were trying to freeze her in time like some kind of living doll. So she wasn't allowed to watch anything appropriate for her age, only Teletubbies, Frozen, Thomas the Tank Engine. At 17 years old, I'm literally losing my mind over this. She would have princess-themed birthday parties like with little kid decorations, and they gave her Barbie dolls and child toys. And while other girls her age were getting their driver's license and going to prom, Katie was being forced to act like she was in preschool. And the only reason she survived this nightmare is because of her ballet teacher, thank God. They noticed something was seriously wrong, and they actually said something instead of minding their business, which a lot of people do. Do not be that person. CPS stepped in, and Katie was immediately rushed to the hospital. She was pale, her hair was falling out and brittle, her skin was literally flaking off, and she showed 0 signs of puberty at 17. Doctors tried to insert a feeding tube to save her life, but her parents had the audacity to refuse, saying that it would make her fat. Like, what? Are you kidding me right now? Katie's parents were eventually arrested, but in court they acted completely clueless, saying that they didn't know that she was malnourished. The lies. Also saying they provided her with plenty of food, she just didn't eat it. But the judge did not buy this ridiculous story for 1 second, especially when they discovered that Katie's dad had actually forged her birth certificate, making her look 2 years younger on paper. But here's what absolutely breaks my heart. Katie still loves them after everything. She wrote a letter begging the judge not to send them to prison, saying that she couldn't cope if they were taken away. Some people say that that's Stockholm Syndrome, and others say it's just proof of how deeply their manipulation controlled her. I mean, either way, this was not parenting. This was control, obsession, and straight up abuse. Because Katie was not allowed to grow up. She wasn't allowed to be a normal teenager, and in their twisted mind, she was never supposed to stop being their little girl forever.
It's because he wasn't only evil, he was literally sick in the head. He loved to play this game of cat and mouse with the police. He loved to taunt them and haunt them. And the fact that we literally do not know who he is terrifying. The Zodiac, who gave himself that name, if you didn't know that, he named himself that, he has been directly tied to at least 5 murders in Northern California between the years of 1968 to 1969. And whoever this person was, he didn't only ruin people's lives, he loved to play games. He would send taunting letters to the police packed with threats, creepy puzzles, and claims that he had up to 37 victims. Those letters started in 1969 and they kept coming until 1974, until suddenly, complete silence. And despite the decades of theories and suspects and deep dive investigations, no one has ever been arrested. And let's just start at the beginning. The first attack happened December 20th of 1968. 17-year-old David and 16-year-old Betty were parked along a quiet stretch of Lake Herman Road, just outside of Vallejo, California. They were on their first date, and whatever they were doing out there that night ended in absolute horror when the two of them were found deceased beside their car. Just after 11 p.m., the bodies of David and Betty were found by a passerby who noticed the brutal crime scene and saw that the car had clear signs of being fired at multiple times. Despite the investigation that followed, though, police were never able to identify, 1, a clear motive, but 2, any suspects at all. Then, barely 6 months later, on July 5th of 1969, 22-year-old Darlene and her boyfriend, 19-year-old Mike, were parked in their car again in Vallejo, California. A man walked up to their vehicle with a flashlight, and Darlene tragically didn't make it, and Mike, on the other hand, was severely injured, but he did survive. Once he was in the hospital recovering, he was able to give police a description of the man who did this. Mike described them to be a white male, around 5 feet 8 inches tall, weighing around 195 to 200 pounds. He said the man had a large face with short, curly, light brown hair. That same night, within an hour of the attack, a call came into the Vallejo Police Department. The voice on the phone, it was a man, and he sounded very calm and weirdly confident when he said, quote, "I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm. I also kids last year. Goodbye, end quote. What do you mean? This anonymous man on the phone wasn't only admitting that he was the person responsible for the attack that night, but he was also confessing to the attack that happened months prior on David and Betty. And just like that, the Zodiac was born. The following month, in August of 1969, the first letter came. 3 different newspapers, the Vallejo Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and San Francisco Examiner, all got very, very disturbing letters from someone claiming to be behind the recent deaths. Each of those 3 letters started in almost the exact same way, saying, quote, I am the the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl last 4th of July, end quote. The spelling on all 3 of the letters was messy, but they were really important because what stood out the most was that for the very first time, those 2 attacks were being publicly linked and linked by the person who claimed to be responsible for them. Each envelope also included a piece of cryptogram, which is a type of puzzle that consists of a short, encrypted text, so it was a part of a larger puzzle made up of 408 symbols. The writer claimed that hidden inside of this puzzle was his identity. And he also was bossy. He had demands, his demand being publish the code on the front page of each paper or more people were going to lose their lives. He said if they didn't, he would, quote, cruise around all weekend, own people in the night, end quote. The Chronicle ended up printing its piece of the cipher the very next day. But police still were not convinced. Vallejo's police chief asked the writer to send more proof, something that only the real perpetrator would know. And then on August 4, the Examiner got a new letter. It began by reading, quote, Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking, end quote. And that was the first time that the world heard the name the Zodiac, and from that point on, this person would be known as the Zodiac. Only 2 months after the second attack came the third. On the night of September 27th, 1969, this time at a lake in Napa County, Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell were just trying to enjoy some alone time by the water when a man in a hood and a shirt with a circle and a cross symbol walked up to them. He threatened them with his weapon and then he continued to tie them up. Then he took a sharp weapon and attacked them repeatedly. Before leaving, he walked up to Brian's car and he wrote a message to leave for the police on the door. Then he picked up a payphone and he calmly called in his newest attack. He dialed the Napa Valley Police Department and on the phone stated, quote, I wanted to report a murder. No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen. I am the one who did it, end quote. So do you see what I mean? This was a pattern. He would commit a crime and then he liked to dial the police and confess to the crime, but not tell them who he was, obviously, or anything about himself, because he loved the chase and he loved the attention and he craved it and he got a thrill from taunting the police. Both Cecilia and Brian were still alive when help arrived and they were rushed to the hospital, but sadly, Cecilia didn't make it. Brian was able to give the police a description of the man that he saw. He described him as being nearly 6 feet tall, weighing around 200 pounds, with dark brown hair and a heavy-set build, which did kind of match up with the previous descriptions they had of this unknown man. When that call from the payphone came in, police were able to trace that call to a payphone located only a few blocks away from the police station, and detectives there, once they showed up, they did find a partial print on the phone. They were also able to recover a partial print of a size 10 shoe print at the scene of the crime, but they were never able to match it to any suspect. Just 2 weeks later, the Zodiac struck again, and I hate to say it, but this happens often. We see it all the time when people like this, serial killers, when they claim their first victim, sometimes they wait a long period of time before claiming their second one to kind of see, like, I guess, test out the waters and see if police have anything on them, see if they are able to get away with it. But once they know that they are, they kind of get this thrill and they kind of start thinking, I mean, like their minds are already sick and twisted. So when this happens, they kind of get this weird confidence and think that they can get away with anything. And that makes them want to do it again. And when they keep getting away with it more and more, they get more cocky and the amount of time between each victim gets shorter and shorter because their confidence gets bigger. And I'm sure that this was the case with the Zodiac because he knew that the police had no idea who he was and he was feeling like he was outsmarting the police by playing this sick game of cat and mouse. He was getting cocky and it was showing. His 4th victim was 29-year-old Paul Stein. He was a cab driver in San Francisco and he was fired at in the head during a ride. 3 teenagers were actually watching from across the street when all of this went down and they saw everything. That included the Zodiac's face because it was lit up by the street light, and they watched him carefully wipe down the car and go through Paul's pockets like he was so relaxed and had all the time in the world. However, his cleanup attempt wasn't that good because he did end up leaving 2 partial fingerprints behind from his right hand. And while all of this was happening, the teenagers called the San Francisco Police Department and they gave a description of this man. They described him to be a husky white guy in a dark, maybe black jacket. But then a very, very big mistake was made because somehow, some way, one of the teenagers accidentally, mistakenly described described this person to be a black male. So only 2 minutes after the kids called this into the police department, 2 patrol officers nearby responded to the scene, and they spotted a white male walking with dark clothing, but they didn't think that this was this guy because they were told that the suspect was a black male and this guy was a white male. So it could not have been him. So the thought didn't even cross their mind, but they did pull up to this guy and they talked to him and they asked him if he had seen anything, and the guy said, yeah, I actually did see something weird. I saw a man holding a weapon and he ran away heading east. So police officers sped off in that direction, but they never found anyone. And later on, the Zodiac wrote a letter claiming that he was that guy. He was the witness that police officers spoke to that night. And when authorities realized that the guy that they were supposed to be looking for was a white male, they were disgusted with their likelihood that they spoke to the Zodiac face to face that night. By the time that officers made it to the crime scene, Paul was already gone. He had already lost his life. They were too late. They searched the neighborhood up and down, but they found absolutely no sign of anything. And at first, police thought that this could have been a robbery gone wrong because they didn't immediately link it to the Zodiac because this was out of his pattern. This was different than his other victims. But then, boom, on October 13th, the San Francisco Chronicle gets a letter. Inside is a piece of Paul Stein's shirt stained red. And in the envelope was also a letter from the Zodiac. The Zodiac bragged about taking yet another life and even said that he was watching the cops as they were examining the crime scene and searching, looking for him. He ended the letter with another threat saying, quote, school children make nice targets. I shall wipe out a school bus some morning, end quote. Yeah, he's a psychopath. That group of teenagers who saw everything go down, as well as the 2 patrol officers, helped police create a composite sketch of the man that they saw, yet nothing really came from it. Throughout the following weeks, the Zodiac continued to send more letters to taunt the police further. A letter was sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in November of 1969, including a 340-character cipher, now known as the Z340. He wanted it printed on the front page, and that was a code, and that coding wasn't solved for 51 years. That's how complicated it was. One expert referred to it as being one of the hardest codes in history ever. For decades, law enforcement, police, authorities, people on the internet, cryptologists tried to crack this code. There were people from all over the world trying to work on cracking this code because the Zodiac would write letters in code and police had no way of figuring out what the letter said until they were able to crack it. But in December of 2020, a group of 3 men solved it. It was an American software engineer named David, an Australian mathematician named Sam, and a Belgian coder named Gerald. They used a computer software program, and after running over 650,000 different variations of what it could possibly be, they finally thought they figured it out. The code was written in a way that required the letters to be read diagonally, rearranged, and then flipped while also skipping certain words. But using that, they uncoded a letter from the Zodiac himself, and it was in their opinion that the letter read, quote, I hope you're having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I'm not afraid of the because it will send me to paradise all that sooner because I now have enough to work for me where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that my new life will be an easy one in paradise death, end quote. In another letter shortly after, the Zodiac wrote, quote, the police shall never catch me because I have been too clever for them, end quote. So still, it pretty much gave them 0 clues as to who this person was, and it felt like just another taunting, evil letter from a man who loved attention. The final letter from the Zodiac ended with what we can assume the Zodiac considered to be a score of how many times he got away with ending a life and how many times the police were on the right track. The score that he wrote down said, me-37, SFPD 0. So even though only 5 victims have been confirmed, he was claiming pretty much to have 37 victims, which is the scariest thing I've ever heard. But even with all that evidence piling up and dozens of suspects being questioned, the Zodiac has never been caught, and it has been over 50 years. There have been a lot of people of interest, a lot of suspects, a lot of people that police thought could be the person, but nothing. It's terrifying, and it has haunted investigators for years. It has also haunted the public equally as much because that's so scary that a person like that is just roaming the world. And it's been a case that people have spoken about for years. This case has sparked an endless amount of theories, wild speculation, and a whole lot of people trying to crack this impossible code to find out who this guy really was. Insane case, nevertheless, and it seems so impossible to me that we just don't know. Like, what do you mean we just don't know? What do you mean we just don't know? That, like, it keeps me up at night. But that is all I have for today's video. I'm really, really curious to see what you guys have to say about this. And yeah, that's all from me today. Thank you guys for sticking through the end of this video. If you made it to the end, I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. By the way, new podcast video is out tonight, so make sure you have your notifications on Apple Podcast or Spotify so you can get notified when the episode comes out. But yeah, massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. I literally love you more than life.
This is Taylor Casey. She went missing just last week during a summer yoga retreat in the Bahamas. More people should be talking about this. So Taylor's from Chicago and she's been a yoga practitioner for 15 years. Taylor joined the Sivananda Ashram Yoga Retreat, which hosted the trip on Paradise Island in the Bahamas. The retreat hosts dozens of programs and vacations throughout the year. Taylor loves yoga and was actually participating in the ashram's certification program. And she was so excited to go on this retreat to fulfill a long-term goal of deepening her practice. While on the retreat, Taylor kept in good contact with her friends and family like usual, and she said she was so excited to tell them all about her trip once she got back. She texted her mom on June 18th a photo of the beach and said, quote, "I miss you, Mom. Look, I'm at the beach." End quote. That was the last time her mom heard from her. Taylor was officially last seen at the yoga retreat the evening of June 19th, and after this, she completely vanished. When she didn't show up to the yoga classes the next morning, the organizers of the retreat reported her missing to the Royal Bahamas Police Force. They also notified the American Embassy. A short while later, Taylor's mom received a phone call from the retreat organizer. Taylor's mom was taken aback as the woman said, quote, "Have you heard from Taylor? She hasn't shown up for yoga classes." End quote. This is how she found out that her daughter was missing. Authorities have since searched the retreat and the surrounding areas, and they're combing through CCTV footage for any clues. They've interviewed members at the retreat and have brought in drones, search and rescue dogs, and divers, and at first they didn't find anything. But 1 week after disappearing, Taylor's phone was found at the bottom of the ocean. This makes sense because Taylor's niece was the only person who had access to her location because of the Find My iPhone app, and according to her family, her phone last pinged in the water. Authorities so far have only stated that her phone was found at the bottom of the ocean, but it's not clear how far away it was from the retreat. The rest of Taylor's belongings were found back at the retreat. Police haven't mentioned whether or not they think foul play is suspected, but her family believes that she is in danger. They say that she would never disappear like this. Her mom has since traveled to the Bahamas to help with the search. It's come to light that people at the retreat are concerned about how this is being handled. It's taken 8 days for this to really get any traction, and people are upset at the retreat for only making a statement about this 3 days ago. You would think that something would have been said the day she went missing to get as many eyes on this case as possible. A lot of people have also pointed out how similar Taylor's case is to Nancy Ings, who also disappeared during a yoga retreat in Guatemala last October. There are a lot of similarities in these two cases, and Nancy is still missing. It's now been over a week with no sign of Taylor. If you have any information about this case, please contact the number on the screen.
This is the story of Stephen Plato. 1995, 20-year-old Stephen met 15-year-old Alyssa Garcia in an online chat room. He traveled to San Antonio, Texas to visit her, and Alyssa ran away with Stephen to live with him back in New York. Alyssa became pregnant at 16, and on January 29th, 1988, they had their first child, a girl who they named Denise Plato. But Stephen could not handle when the baby cried. He would pinch her until she was black and blue. He even stuffed her in a cooler one time until she was damn near dead. So when baby Denise was 8 months, Alyssa decided to give her up for adoption. She said she wanted to give her a chance at life because she don't believe she would have had one with Stephen around. Baby Denise was adopted by a young couple named Kelly and Anthony Frusco, who was also from New York. They renamed her Katie. Now, Katie thrived in her new environment. She was great in school. She became a young artist. She graduated from high school in 2016 and went on to attend college. In August 2016, Katie, who is now 18 years old, decided she wanted to look for her biological parents, Stephen and Alyssa. And she ended up finding them on Facebook. The three met up, and it must have been a good reunion because Katie decided to move in with her biological parents in Richmond, Virginia. Now, Stephen and Alyssa went on to have 2 other children. So Katie was moving in with them and her siblings. But just 2 months after Katie arrived, Stephen and Alyssa's relationship started to fall apart. Shit started getting weird. Stephen would sleep on the floor in Katie's room. When Alyssa asked him, "Hey man, what's going on?" Stephen said, "Mind your business." Alyssa decided to move out in 2016, and they decided to share custody of the other two children. In May of 2017, Alyssa was going through her 11-year-old daughter's journal, and she couldn't believe what it said. It said, "Katie is pregnant. Dad said they feel like a couple. My dad is a slut. My dad is Satan." The 11-year-old also said that her dad instructed them to call Katie, who's their biological sister, their stepmother. Alyssa like, "Oh, hell no." She called Stephen immediately, who is now living with his mother in North Carolina with Katie. But he didn't even lie about it. He confirmed it. Yes, she's pregnant, and I plan on marrying her. Alyssa wasted no time calling the police on their ass, and the police interviewed their other two children, who confirmed that Katie was pregnant by Stephen. But by the time they issued the arrest warrant, the two had fled. July 20th, 2017, Katie and Stephen got married. They had to lie on their marriage documents, of course. But guess who attended the wedding? Stephen's mother. That lady just didn't give a damn, did she? But also, Katie's adoptive parents attended as well. Mind y'all, they were still on the run while doing all this. They were tucked away in Wake County, North Carolina. While they were tucked away, Katie will post on Instagram about her and Stephen's relationship and engagement, but nobody knew that this was her biological father. September 1st of that same year, Katie gave birth to her and Stephen's son, and they named him Bennett Plato. But the moment with their newborn was short-lived because Stephen and Katie were arrested in January of 2018 in Wake County, North Carolina. The charges were incest and adultery, and the two were extradited back to Virginia to face trial, where Stephen's attorney maintained that Stephen's relationship with Katie was consensual and that Katie was a grown-ass woman. Stephen also admitted that he was deeply in love with his daughter, and that outweighed the issue of them being related. The judge ordered the two to not contact each other while they figured out custody for baby Bennett. In the meantime, he stayed with Stephen's mother in Knightdale, North Carolina. Katie and Stephen were released on bond, and Katie decided to move back in with her adoptive parents. And when she moved back in, she called Stephen and told him, "This ain't even gonna work out." And Stephen was pissed. On April 11th, 2018, Stephen went to go pick his son up from his mother's house. He told her that he was going to take him for the night and that he was going to Skype Katie so that she could see him. But the next morning on April 12th, Stephen calls his mother and told her, "I just killed my son." And he told her to call the police, but don't go over there herself. And that's what she did. She called the police to do a welfare check to Stephen's house. She even told them if they couldn't get in, it was a key under his mat. They ended up finding baby Bennett at around 9 a.m., stuffed in the closet. They said he died from being suffocated. After he killed his son, Stephen then drove to New York and waited in a liquor store parking lot across the street from Katie and her adoptive parents' home. Katie and her adoptive father were about to leave to visit her grandmother and clean her house. This is something routine that they would do, and Stephen knew this routine. So when he seen them pull out, he followed them. He caught Katie and Anthony at a red light and pulled up beside them. He pulled out his AR-15, shooting and killing them instantly. A resident nearby heard the gunshots and called the police. But Stephen called his mother and told her everything he did. He even told her that he was next. She quickly relayed the message to the police. She even told them what type of car Stephen was driving. But it was too late. By the time they caught up with Stephen, the car was on the side of the road about 16 miles from the crime scene, still running. When the police inched closer, they seen Stephen was slumped over dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This was a lot. I'm curious to know, Yellow Tape, what y'all think. And Stephen's mama, what's up with you? You was just cool with all this?
There's a really strange missing persons case happening right now, and I don't know why more people aren't talking about it. This is Caleb Harris. He's a 21-year-old college student who disappeared on March 4th after stepping outside of his Texas apartment to grab an Uber Eats order. The details surrounding this case are bizarre because his last moments before vanishing were documented on Snapchat. Adding to this mystery is the fact that human remains were just found in a well near his apartment, but police don't know if they even belong to Caleb. So on the evening of March 3rd, Caleb, his two roommates, and a mutual friend stayed up pretty late playing online video games with a former high school classmate. They all lived in an apartment on the 1900 block of Ennis Jocelyn Road near the Texas A&M University at Corpus Christi. Caleb was a second-year student there. At around 12:56 a.m., a doorbell camera from a nearby apartment showed Caleb, his friend, and one roommate in the parking lot of the apartment complex playing with a puppy. The puppy belonged to the girlfriend of one of his roommates. The camera then showed them returning back into the apartment. Shortly after, the friend left and both roommates said they were going to head to bed, but Caleb said that he was going to stay up and order some snacks off of Uber Eats for his school lunch the next day. A few hours would go by, and at 2:44 a.m., Caleb sent a Snapchat to his sister that showed him walking the puppy in what appears to be the apartment complex's parking lot. At 3:03 a.m., Caleb sent another Snapchat, but this time to a friend who lives in San Antonio. It was a picture of a small bridge over a drainage ditch within a few hundred feet of the entrance to his apartment. His cell phone last pinged to the nearest cell phone tower at 3:12 a.m., and after this, he completely vanished. 10 minutes later, the Uber Eats driver delivered his order to his apartment. He left it outside near the front door per his request. Caleb's roommates woke up the next morning and found the Uber Eats order still outside in the exact same spot. They also saw that Caleb's truck was still parked right outside. His keys and wallet were still inside the apartment, but Caleb and his phone were gone. He was reported missing not long after, and police searched the entire apartment complex as well as the surrounding areas, but there wasn't a single piece of evidence found. There were no signs of a struggle and no indication that there was a hit-and-run situation. Uber made a statement saying the order was marked as completed without any reported incident, and the driver continued to make other deliveries throughout the night. It's literally as if Caleb vanished into thin air, but there could be a possible break in this case. On Monday, a city employee in Corpus Christi found human remains inside of a 40-foot deep well that's part of a sewer system. This well is located in close proximity to Caleb's apartment and the university. Authorities had a hazmat team come in who had to drain the well water and wear hazardous material suits to recover the remains. But because of the state of the remains, they have not yet been identified, and it's not clear if they belong to Caleb. They were sent off to the county medical examiner, but the Corpus Christi Police Department said that at this time, there's no evidence that the remains are connected to Caleb's disappearance. What's incredibly odd, though, is that CCPD stated that the area where the remains were found had previously been searched multiple times over by several different agencies during the search for Caleb. Caleb was described as a creature of habit, so if this is found to be him, the question of how and why he ended up there will need to be answered. His family has created a GoFundMe to help bring Caleb home, so I'll leave that here. If you have any information about this case, please contact the number on the screen.
This is the story of Christine Paolilla. In the summer of '99, Clear Lake City, Texas, Christine, who had just turned 14, was approached by a 15-year-old boy named Christopher Snyder at a party. Now, this surprised Christine because at a very young age, she was diagnosed with alopecia. She had lost her hair, her eyebrows, and her eyelashes. She was bullied all through elementary and middle school. So when Christopher started giving her all this unfamiliar attention, she fell head over heels for him. Now, Christine's parents didn't approve of Christopher, but she didn't give a damn. The two were inseparable. They even started doing drugs together, a lot of marijuana, narcotics, and liquor, until Christopher got busted trying to support his habit. And this left Christine to start high school all by herself. High school was no different than elementary school for Christine. They made fun of her makeup, they made fun of her wigs, they made fun of her glasses, until she met two young ladies who was a grade above her, Tiffany Powell and Rachel Colorutis. Now, these two felt bad for Christine, so they took her under their wing, took her shopping for new wigs, settled down that makeup, and got her some new glasses. Rachel and Tiffany became Christine's best friends. The trio was inseparable for 3 years in high school until May of 2003, when it was time for Rachel and Tiffany to graduate. This was leaving Christine by herself yet again. Until the summer of 2003, Christopher finally gets out of juvenile after doing 3 years, and the two picked right back up where they left off. They picked that drug use back up as well. Christine desperately wanted the approval of Tiffany and Rachel, who were living together at this time, Their house was the party house, and Christine took Christopher over there, but she didn't get the response that she thought she was going to get. Tiffany and Rachel couldn't stand Christopher, but Christopher did become acquaintances with their boyfriends, Marcus, Priscilla, and Adelbert Sanchez, who were small-time marijuana dealers. On July 18th, just 2 weeks after Christine introduced Christopher to her friends, the two were in desperate need of some drugs, but didn't have any funds, so Christine concocted a plan to rob Marcus and Adelbert. That night, the two parked blocks away and walked to Rachel and Tiffany's house. Christine led the way. As soon as she opened the door, she opened fire, and Christopher followed, killing all 4 teens, 2 of which didn't even have a chance to get off the couch. The two stole all the drugs they could find, and right when they was about to flee, Christine turned around to make sure everybody was dead. That's when she saw Rachel still moving. She even had her cell phone in her hand attempting to dial 911. She even asked Christine, "Why are you doing this?" And Christine finished her off with the butt of her gun, splitting her skull open. When the news broke, everybody catered to Christine because they knew that those were her best friends. Now, Christine played the grieving friend very well, so well that she wasn't even a person of interest at the time. Tiffany and Rachel's neighbors, who were a couple, helped the police out with some sketches of what they seen from their window that night. The reward was $100K, the highest ever in the U.S. at that time, but still no serious leads. Christine went on to graduate, and by the summer of 2004, Christine, now 18, was busted for shoplifting and ordered into a rehab program. That same year, her boyfriend, Christopher Snyder, also went to jail for car theft in Kentucky. That ended their almost 5-year relationship because in rehab, Christine fell in love with another guy, a heroin addict named Justin Rott. The two got married in March 2005, right when Christine got her trust fund from her father, who had died when she was just 2 years old, $360,000. July of that same year, her and her new husband were watching TV and the unsolved murders come on the screen. That's when she decided to tell Justin about her part in it. By November of that same year, Christine and Justin were living in a motel in San Antonio. That money ain't last no time. And by July of the following year, Crime Stoppers get an anonymous phone call from a male saying Christine is responsible for the murder of the teens. July 19th, 2006, after following their paper trail, Christine and her husband were arrested. Now, as you can see, when she was arrested, she had let herself go. I know she got alopecia, so her eyebrows were gone, her eyelashes were gone, and they were in there shooting up heroin like no other. They found like 80 needles in this hotel room, along with blood everywhere, all on the pillows. Y'all gotta Google it if y'all want to see those pictures. Christopher Snyder, who's now living in Greensville, South Carolina with his girlfriend, got wind that the police were looking for him. On August 5th, 2006, his decomposing body was found in the woods. He had committed suicide by overdosing on prescription meds. With Christopher out the way, of course, Christine blamed it all on him, but her story kept changing, and her interviews had to be frequently stopped for medical attention because she was going through withdrawals. It was so bad that her attorneys didn't even want her to take the stand during her trial. Her husband, Justin, testified against her so he wouldn't get hit with drug charges. The anonymous tip, who was a male who spent time with Christine in rehab, took the stand against her. Tiffany and Rachel's neighbors, who helped the police with the sketches, pointed Christine out in a lineup. On October 13th, 2008, Christine was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 40 years. She was spared the death penalty because she was 17 when she committed these murders. She went 3 years untouched without running her mouth. Do y'all think she would have got away with it if she would have kept her mouth closed?